Hey everybody, Tony O here with McGraw-Hill, and in this short clip, we're going to take a look and revisit some of the features and supports that really help take learning for multilingualistic learners to the next level. But we know that these tips and tricks are great for all of our students. To prime our brains, let's take a second to pause and reflect. Go ahead and grab that teacher edition, and what I would like for you to do is skim over a lesson or maybe two or three to really get an idea of looking and hunting for some specialized vocabulary that may have a unique meaning in mathematics. So as we mix these opportunities for students between social and academic and even language that's different from school and home, one example that I can think of is working with students during snack time. And in first grade, we had an opportunity to kind of use orange slices alongside counting and things. And when I said to a student, "What's the sum of your oranges?" the student said, "Yes." And I had to think about that for a minute. But what he thought I was asking is, would he like some, like SOME, oranges? And so that's one example of many words, but go ahead and pause now, take a look, and then we'll come back together, whole group. Once we find these vocabulary words that have that specialized meaning, some of the things we might be thinking about in our planning is, what language objectives might I want to add that include this idea of the processing, the input and the output of reading, writing, speaking, and listening? What words or phrases, even if familiar, might take that new meaning or context in mathematics? What key vocabulary do I want to introduce so that the words will be used throughout the lesson? Does it make sense to introduce it before the lesson or maybe during the lesson? And what visuals or realia might I have in my classroom that I can add additional meaning and bring that into the task? How can I meet the various language demands with scaffolds to allow students to actually use the language? We know they learn the language by using the language. So what kind of scaffolds can we think of? As well as, what about how we can ensure rigorous learning during games by putting miles on the tongue of kids talking about the math, explaining their thinking, or even modify that activity so I don't reduce the level of rigor, but I keep that opportunity for them to engage. So these are some of the questions that we are going to answer. But first, I want to remind you of the language lessons that are provided by Everyday Mathematics in the differentiation section online. These 2 pages do many of what those bullets are talking about. You can see here that even the games are actually differentiated. Even down below, the differentiated options are even differentiated. So this approach, really scaffolding every step of the way, is something you can print off by unit or even by lesson. Next, I just want to remind you of the implementation guide. Here you're going to notice in section 10, tons of research and strategies are here with nice descriptions to really remind us of those key strategies that we can bring in on demand at any time. You will find these sprinkled throughout the teacher edition as well. The support in Everyday Math is very vibrant, and so are the teachers using Everyday Mathematics. So in this section, we're actually going to share maybe some new ideas or adding on to ideas that you already have that really get kids talking and thinking in the multilingualistic classroom. So kind of the 4 sections we're going to talk about in these teacher vibes. We're going to talk about the math practices, ways to bring in that rich discussion, some tips around vocabulary instruction. They could be new or, a revisit. And we're going to sum it up with this idea of really enhancing visually situation types. So through this, let's take a look starting off with those math practices. Now, if you have not visited them in a while, they are in the back of your book. The 8 practices here are really all about the way of being a mathematician. When we think about these strategies, the whole goal that's here is to really build out the talking classroom and to make sure that students are in charge of their own clarity of learning. And if you're kind of wondering, what are these 8 standards? Check them out in the back of your teacher edition. You're going to find in the end matter that you have the full little script for each of those process or math practice standards, and there are 8 of them total. And what Everyday Math has done is given you little bite-sized goals. They're called a GMP, a goal for math practice. And why does this matter? Because that very specific icon that you see here is found in your teacher edition. That GMP will allow kind of an awareness in the flow of a lesson that, hey, when I see this feature, it's asking me specific questions that are going to allow processing and chances to add precision to our language and really get kids talking. And in this show and share, you're going to find a district-created tool that was created by a pre-K through 12th grade math team to do more of what Everyday Math started. The GMPs are embedded over here where it has the summary of the standard of the math practice. And over on the right-hand side are agnostic questions that any point when you're at the teacher table or facilitating when you're walking around, these questions will help add that level of in-the-moment support around that specific math practice. So be sure to download these. The link is provided in our professional learning PDF. Next up, how can we build a positive classroom culture through the talking and listening culture that we set up for students and their environment? In this section, thinking about what's on our walls, to really help remind students what a good turn and talk looks like. In Everyday Mathematics, in the first few units, you will find something called Guidelines for Discussion. This is really setting up the vibe of the classroom, and having kids help you generate your own poster is always a win-win, so that we can hear from all students about what they believe the norms should be. These are a couple of posters that we created, one for more early childhood, where we ask students to even think about how we learn from mistakes. Over here on the right, it's really taking the tips from the teacher edition you see in the purple icon, but we just kind of made it our own with some of those visuals, so that when we refer to it during our discussions, all students are on target because they know what we mean by, the certain images. So these help students be collaborative, reflective, especially when we have these posted so that we can refer to them in the classroom. Putting sentence starters on strips are a really great thing. They also remind us as teachers to bring in that engagement of rich discourse. But I was even reminded reviewing and prepping for this session around using conversation starters. And look at the compare-contrast that's happening here. When I'm asking students to do a formal turn and talk, the way of these conversation starters with the full sentences really allow going beyond the frames to get that rich conversation going. So for me, that's definitely a new goal. So thanks, Implementation Guide. Oh, and I don't want to forget, I know of a specific district that actually are looking at the conversation starters embedded in every lesson and making lesson-specific sentence strips that are ready to go. So, way to go, guys. And here's a new way to think about sentence stems or conversation starters. How about talking tense, where you can see folded up, here's students playing a game. On one side is the listener, other side is the speaker. And when we're engaging in others, how awesome to have permission as someone grappling with language to even say, I'm confused about. And so it's not a negative thing. We're really asking for precision, and this is a tool to help us get there. The next tip is provided from the resource Visible Learning by John Hattie. And the goal is to hear from others, but to consolidate your thinking. So in this example, you can imagine as a language learner, I'm listening to 3 other students explain their thinking. While we write down our ideas, it provides a space for all of you to come together in the discourse to consolidate, which strategy is most efficient or that type of thing. You can use it definitely with 4 students, but how about downsizing it to 3 students? Some teachers enjoy putting this on big chart paper and letting them get after it, and some like dry erase boards. In this short clip, we're adding a new area of language. We're adding mindset language, taken from some of Joe Bowler's work. And here you can see on the light, we have options to help communicate to the teacher how we're feeling about the task that we are about to complete. And check out that middle stoplight where it says, I am struggling and learning, because we want kids, even though they may be struggling, to understand that's part of the learning process. So that's one way, but how about this way with the Bitmojis? So simple. Again, paperclip, you can slide it along so that kids can engage with you about being ready to do the math task. Okay, we're ready for vocabulary tools. As we look at the screen, you can see we're going to cover vocabulary cards, things to consider for your word wall, graphic organizers, and ways to embed gestures and visuals. In your Math Masters, you will find graphic organizers that support the idea of stepping out vocabulary, especially around bigger concepts. So you can use these to help make the definitions or properties of the definitions more visible. You can print these and put them right in a student notebook, or some teachers like to take these ideas or enlarge them on bigger paper to make them as anchor charts in the classroom. Especially for the unit that you're in, we want students to have a space to be able to refer back to that language. Okay, guys, if you have not yet been to the Virtual Learning Community, which is a peer-reviewed site by the Everyday Mathematics authors and a community hub for users globally using Everyday Mathematics, this space beats teacher pay teacher because A, it's free, and B, these are items that are really connected to the work we're all inclusively doing around everyday mathematics. So an example are teacher created vocabulary cards in both English and Spanish. Logging in, clicking resources, and searching vocabulary cards, you will find a plethora of resources for your grade and the unit that you are in. In this teacher tip, you can use cognates, an important component of accelerating academic language acquisition for English learners and teaching strategies for learning new words and concepts in English. So adding this alongside the word in English and Spanish is a win-win. And this short clip was taken from the Virtual Learning Community, where it shows a teacher in action being thoughtful around stepping out and developing the background knowledge around rabbit pins. This 3rd grade activity is relying on the understanding of what that is in order to use their skills to design their own rabbit pin. And did you know that Everyday Mathematics already has organized by grade literature lists that also help develop background and bring in those math concepts through a playful way. Nonfiction and fiction is at your fingertips, either on the Teacher Center under Resources or in the Student Center by clicking the Home connection. Just a quick shout out to the situation types and story problems found in Everyday Mathematics. So as we think about our mental math and fluency, of course, there's many different places where we have tasks that students haven't yet solved. In this example of a mental math, it says Grant has 3 green markers and 4 yellow markers. How many markers does he have in all? And so as we think about strategies that help bring in thinking first, what if you tried this? What if you asked students to do a turn and talk about what they notice and what they wonder about this situation type? Another ready-to-go idea is to remove the question. What happens when we just ask students to engage in the idea of Grant has 3 green markers and 4 yellow markers? Having students turn and talk, you can feel lots of things. It's relaxing the demand on language. It's also relaxing the anxiety that we have when we put a focus on just getting the answer. So when we really step out and think about the situation, it adds a whole nother layer of comprehension for all students. Well, what about this idea? What about numberless situations? Have you tried this one yet? Where you have your full situation type up on the screen, and then you just hide those numbers. And so students now are being very playful with the situation, and they start to figure out, okay, if I have some and I add some, I'm going to have a total. And so really allowing kids to tinker around with that helps build their confidence and language acquisition as well. And what about tools that allow that visualization of the situation type? In your Math Masters or even in the e-tools under the diagram tab, you will be able to find the variety of diagram charts that are ready to go. So as students are trying to solve it, they may start with a part total, but then recognize the fact that it's actually a situation where it's a start unknown or a change unknown. So having these tools ready to go in a student toolkit, this is an example where they're slid into a page protector that's cut in half, and then they use a little felt piece and a dry erase marker so that they can do their thinking, erase it, and put it back inside their toolkit. Okay, that's a wrap. That's the end of our show and share in this segment of multilinguistic learning strategies and tips. But I really encourage you to think about all of the things we've shared and which one or two things might you try or make your own. This is important and it's big work, and it really does take a community of learners. So a special shout out to the virtual learning community and also the authors at Everyday Mathematics. But as always, feel free to share what you created back with us through either the virtual learning community or straight to my email. Thanks so much, you guys, and have a great day.